Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
Three forwards in deep, Moore with the puck. Sends it up high, Gavrikov, a shot, and he scores! Wrist shot from 50 feet, straight out by Gavrikov, and the Kings have a 1-0 lead.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings.
Power play winding down, speeding into the zone is Byfield. Byfield one-on-one, lost the puck, tried to get around Ekblad, centered, and Moore scores. Well, Byfield stayed right with it, even though he couldn't get a shot himself. He threw it in front, and the Kings score as the power play came to an end. Trevor Moore and the Kings.
Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
Welcome back, Kings fans. I am Jesse Cohen. This is All the Kings Men. Preseason is over, you guys. Real LA Kings hockey starts Thursday night. We'll have our annual Top 10 Questions for the Season episode with Nick Nixon and Jim Fox on Thursday morning for you. But for today, we're wrapping up all the conversations from training camp. Where will the goalies wind up? Which lines of defensive pairs will start the season? And, of course, the injuries to Drew Doughty and Arthur Kaliev. Josh Schaefer is back to talk with me, so let's get to it. All right, final rosters are in. That doesn't mean that the rosters for opening day are set. Joining me today to discuss that and more, Josh Schaefer. How are you doing today, Josh?
I'm great, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
So the preseason's over, Josh, but that does not mean, like I said, that the preseason begins. But it does mean that we can finally answer the top 10 questions facing the LA Kings for training camp in the 2024-25 season. So we're going to start. We're going to go down the line, and we will address the opening night roster as we go. Question number 1, which goalies will be assigned to which teams? It looks like, no surprises, Kemper and Riddick will play for the LA Kings. Portillo and Copley will play for the Ontario Reign. Jacob Ingham signed an AHL contract since the last time you and I spoke, and he and Dryden McKay will begin the season playing for the Greenville Swamp Rabbits.
Yeah, and not too many surprises there. I think that a lot of people guessed that Copley would join Eric Portillo with the Reign, and then Dryden McKay, who was signed over the summer, going down to Greenville. And I think I mentioned this the last time we talked, but good for Jacob Ingham. Great guy, talented goalie. You know, as a prospect, he had a lot of upside with the Reign, or with the organization, and then was really good when he played for the Reign last year. So good for him. Another crack in between the pipes for Jacob Ingham, and obviously he's expected to start in Greenville.
I mean, he is an insurance policy on top of an insurance policy at this point.
Yeah.
Phoenix Copley will be the one presumably called up if anything should happen to Kemper and Riddick, and then Ingham is the one who would fill in for Copley.
Yeah.
Tons of experience at both levels, AHL and ECHL, and he signs an AHL-only deal. Question number 2, what will the forward lines be to start the season? Not a ton of surprise in lines 1 through 3. I'm not going to worry about which line is number 2 and which line is number 3, but Laferriere, Kopitar, Kempe, Moore, Deneau, Jeannot, Fiala, Byfield, Fogle. As of today, we're recording this on the 7th, Monday. As of today, the Kings are only carrying 12 forwards, which means the fourth line is Turcotte, Thomas, and Lewis. It has been speculated that Andre Lee will rejoin the club before Thursday. If that's the case, unclear how he would be used, presumably swapping out with one of those 3 guys, if not all of those 3 guys. But the 4 lines, at least today on October 7th, are set, and no surprises at all, frankly.
Yeah. Like you said about Andre Lee, I think the last time we talked, I was not under the impression that Andre Lee was going to be with the team for opening night, but things have certainly changed over the course of the last 3-4 days to the point where I probably would think that Andre Lee could be with the team for opening night. I know that Jim Hiller seems to be a big fan. Andre Lee has had a really good preseason and a really good training camp with the Kings. And it seems like he may have played his way onto the roster at this point. But you're right, at least with him being sent to the rain for now, that makes it seem like it's Trevor Lewis, Alex Turcotte, and Akil Thomas on the fourth line. But he was with the team in Quebec City for the 2 preseason games against Boston and Florida. So I think it is certainly understandable for him to be with the Kings on opening night. I don't know if that means he's starting the game on the fourth line with the Kings or if he's in the lineup at all. But I'm starting to think that he's probably going to be on the NHL roster come opening night. But I guess things could still change.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to sort of hammer home is that, we are recording on the afternoon of Monday the 7th. As of right now, Andre Lee is on the Ontario Reign.
Yes.
As is Samuel Fagemo, as is Jack Studnicka. All three of those players, any of those 3 players, I shouldn't say all 3, any one of those 3 players could be recalled at any point.
Yep.
We're going off of speculation that it's Andre Lee, and if it comes down to a matter of position and style of game, it makes the most sense for it to be Andre Lee. Turcotte and Thomas are on 2-way deals. Trevor Lewis, by many accounts, not expected to play a full 82 games. But if another injury occurs in the top 6 or the top 9, maybe he's not the most rational choice. And all of this, of course, is a result of Arthur Kaliyev breaking his collarbone in training camp. So anyway, those are the forward lines exiting camp. The next question, who will play on the power play? And these questions are going to start to have a lot to do with Drew Doughty. The simple answer is that Brandt Clarke, it looks like, will be playing power play 1 alongside Anze Kopitar, Adrian Kempe, Kevin Fiala, and Alex Laferriere. How that goes, that's a conversation that we'll have with Jim and Nick about the upcoming season. But for now, it looks like Brandt Clarke will be quarterbacking, power play 1. Although I have to say, having watched him in that role a few times, I'm not sure that they use him in the traditional power play quarterback sense. He doesn't seem to be running the power play. He's out there and he gets touches, but it doesn't feel like his will is the one directing play.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's the role they want him to play rather than kind of just be up at the point. Mm-hmm. I think time will tell, really. But yeah, it seems like he's going to be on that top unit with those other 4 guys that you mentioned. He seems like the natural choice to be in that spot. I think that the plan is for him one day to absolutely be that guy full time. He was that player with the Ontario Reign last season. For whatever reason, there was a point in the year where early on Brandt Clarke was, I don't remember the exact stat, but I want to say he was leading all defensemen in the American Hockey League in shots and shot attempts because he was shooting the puck so often, especially on the power play. Now, there came a time throughout the season where his shot numbers, shot attempts, shooting percentage, everything started to tick downward a little bit. And he just didn't seem to be shooting the puck as much on the power play. Of course, by that point, Samuel Fagemo had become the number 1 target for the Reign on the advantage in the AHL. Now, talking with Jim Hiller before the team left for Quebec, he said, Brandt Clarke is going to get power play time, and we need him to shoot the puck. First and foremost, he needs to take advantage of those opportunities. So I think it seems like there's been an emphasis on Brandt Clarke being on power play 1, being that guy up at the blue line, whether or not he's quarterbacking the power play or not. There has seemed to be an emphasis on him shooting the puck when he has the opportunity to do so. And I think that fits him very well because we know he can pass the puck. He can pass the puck just as good as anybody who could possibly play in that role for the Kings. So if he's also shooting the puck and he's doing it well, I think things are going to be just fine with Brandt Clarke manning power play 1 in the place of Drew Doughty.
And this is sort of the silver lining of the Drew Doughty conversation, because I'm certainly never going to publicly express the idea that Drew Doughty's absence is in any way a positive, but people wanted to see Brandt Clarke get power play time, and he will get a lot of it. And I'm not sure he would have gotten any of it had Drew Doughty not gotten injured. So it's a tough silver lining, but a silver lining nonetheless. The next question on our list, what will the defensive pairs be to start the season? So we're going right back to Brandt Clarke, because he will stay with Joel Edmondson at least 5-on-5. What we've seen so far, and this will change, right? I don't anticipate that this will stay the same Jim Hiller likes to tinker. But for now, it looks like Mikey Anderson and Jordan Spence will be the top pair. Gavrikov and Burrows will be the second pair. Edmondson and Clark will be the third pair. And Englund and Jones will be the extra defensemen. Now, before Drew Doughty was hurt, Zach Dooley and I were on the record as saying we expected and anticipated 8 defensemen. Once Drew Doughty got hurt, I wasn't sure that they would stay with 8 defensemen. They appear to be making that decision. Caleb Jones will play on his off side. I've seen a lot of people ask why, and this is total speculation on my part, Josh, but Joel Edmondson has not played 82 games in a long time in a season. And Brant Clark, despite his presence on Power Play 1 and all the rave reviews that he's getting, I am not entirely certain that they trust him to play, a full load of minutes, 82 games a season. There are also going to be certain matchups where they want a certain physicality in the lineup. So Andreas Englund may slot in for somebody. And Caleb Jones has a ton of experience. So I don't think Englund and Jones are going to be passengers all season long. I think we'll see all 8 guys play somewhat regularly.
Yeah. And I mean, Andreas Englund is one of the few guys who played all 82 games last year too. Jones certainly has experience playing on his offside as well. So as a lefty playing on the right side, and look, we talked about this the last time you and I sat down, and it was that Jim Hiller and the staff, based off of how things had gone in the past, are not super keen to play a lefty on the right side because there's only 3 healthy defensemen that can play, or 3 healthy right-handed defensemen, that being Burrows, Spence, and Clark. So I don't think this coaching staff is keen on playing somebody like Caleb Jones, for example, on the right side because they're a lefty, but they know that they can. So I think you're right. I absolutely don't expect those 2 guys to just be passengers, especially at the start of the season. I think there's going to be some movement, and it's nice to have 2 guys like that aren't part of your top 6 defensemen, at least not in your plans at the start of the season going into opening night, because if you've got a guy who could be essentially your 7th defenseman in Andreas Englund, who played in all 82 games last year, and Caleb Jones, who has NHL experience that can play on both the left and the right, and neither one of those guys are factoring into your top 6 going into opening night. For me, you got to think that that's a pretty good place to be, especially when you consider that a future Hall of Famer got hurt in a freak injury in the preseason and is not available for you on opening night. So again, Drew Doughty is irreplaceable both on and off the ice, but to fill some of those holes, I think the Kings are actually in a pretty decent spot. And that's not even talking about how well the defensive core looked in the preseason as well. Again, on the last show, I feel like I raved about the way that Kyle Burrows had filled in while playing with Mikey Anderson. Now, those 2 probably aren't even expected to skate together on opening night, but the fact that they showed that they can, to me, is a good sign as well.
Despite the score against Florida, in their 2 games against Florida and Boston and Quebec, I think they outshot their opponents 2-1 in both games.
Yeah, they did.
The defense did an excellent job of stopping shots from getting through to Darcy Kemper.
Yeah.
And all of that, what you just said, ignores the fact that Jacob Muvrari, as your 9th defenseman in Ontario, stepped in last season when Gavrikov was hurt, and they went straight to him, pulled him out of Ontario, and he filled in.
And he played down the stretch, too, in the playoff push.
Yeah.
So it's certainly, again, it kind of like what you said about Brant Clark. Drew Doughty getting hurt is not a good thing, but it does create some opportunities for some other guys that are more than capable to fill in this capacity.
Yeah. I mean, it happened 2 years ago. It's funny. I've been listening to a bunch of other Kings podcasts, and people keep talking about the 1992-93 season where Gretzky missed part of the year with an injury. And I'm just screaming at my phone going like, why are you going back to 1993? It happened in 2021-22 with the same player.
With Drew Doughty, yeah.
Like, we don't have to do apples to oranges. We can just do a direct apples to apples comparison.
The Sean Dursey season.
Yes.
We talked about that on the last
show. Exactly. And this is an opportunity for Burrows or Clark or Jones or somebody
Spence
to shine. Spence and Anderson, to me, I think is going to be a great pair. Remains to be seen, but I have all the faith in the world in them. The next question is who will play on the penalty kill? No real updates since the last time we talked, other than we've seen some shorthanded goals. We've heard from the coaching staff that they want to do a more aggressive. This isn't about who plays on the penalty kill. This is just what we've seen in training camp. I find it fascinating, Josh, that they changed the penalty kill 2 seasons ago. They changed the power play last season. Or do I have that backwards? They changed the power play 2 seasons ago. They changed the penalty kill last season. And now they might be changing both again. I'm stuck in between. It's either too complicated to change mid-season, and so you need the off-season, but they don't seem to be spending a ton of time on it, or it's simple enough that you can change it every year and do it in a 2-week span. So, like, which is it? Is it hard to change, or isn't it? But we saw early in camp, all the pairs. It's basically one player per line who isn't going to be killing penalties. It's Laferriere, it's Jeannot, it's Fiala, it's Turcotte, and we'll see on the defenseman because Doughty's absence changes everything.
Yeah, it does. I also think that what you've seen from the forwards, it certainly helps when you have players like Kopitar and Kempe playing together on a line, playing together on the penalty kill, and in the preseason, each one of them scores a shorthanded goal, assisted by the other. And it was the exact same goal both times, just going from one player to the other.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is something that you could probably expect in the season, is them being a little bit more aggressive in that sense. But really, like, for me, the penalty kill was really good last year. I think when you look back to last year, it feels like it wasn't, because of the playoff series against Edmonton, where it seemed like they just scored every time the Kings took a penalty. But in reality, the Kings' penalty kill was good last year. It was reliable last year. You and I were talking about this the other night during the game. I said, I feel like the Kings are going to score a lot of shorthanded goals this year. And you said they've scored a lot of shorthanded goals the last 2 years, really. Like, it just seems like maybe last year wasn't as good as it actually was. So yeah, the penalty kill, I feel like it's going to be a collection of different players. But like you said, it's pretty much one guy per line that's not probably going to kill penalties.
We probably already covered question 6 earlier in this recording, but the question is, who will be the last cuts / surprise standouts? And it's Andre Lee.
Andre Lee?
I mean, I was not expecting that heading in. I know that other people did expect it and were very vocal in their expectation. I didn't see it coming. And as of 4 or 5 days ago, I still didn't see it coming, but he appears to be this year's Alex Laferriere, for lack of a better comparison.
Yeah. I am very impressed with what Lee has done this preseason and training camp. I have always been impressed with his game, and Marco Sturm has talked about him a lot when he's been, 2 years ago, he was an incredibly improved player for the Ontario Reign, probably the team's most improved player from game 1 to game 72. Last year, he was out on 2 separate occasions for a pretty long duration of time, and in his first game back, both times, scored 2 goals. I've always loved watching him play. I still was not expecting to see him come out and potentially make the opening night roster for the Kings. I don't know how long he will stay in that position. It's too hard to tell because the season hasn't started yet. Things could be very different in 2 weeks' time, where what if the Kings are short on goals, they need a scorer, they want to call up Samuel Fagemo, and like things could change. But I think based off of what we've seen from the Kings, we don't know what the team's identity is going to be, but I have a pretty good idea of what they would like that identity to be, at least in my head. And for me, Andre Lee fits that identity. Someone who is big, strong, fast, will block shots, will hit people, and can also score goals. I think he just fits that mold. And that, to me, is the identity that the Kings are trying to play with this season. And when you really start to think about what he brings to the lineup, where he would play in the lineup, and how the Kings want to play hockey this year, to me, I look back and think, why wasn't I thinking about Andre Lee in this role 2 weeks ago? Because now it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense to me.
The funny thing is that I think part of the reason people weren't thinking about him is the impression that he's young.
Yeah.
But he and Fagemo are actually the same age. They're both 24, which is not that young. Like they're both.
He's a college guy. The guys that come from college are typically a little bit older.
But like I think Fagemo, Lee, and I want to say maybe even Turcotte were all taken in the same draft. I may be a year off on Turcotte being included in
Turcotte
that.
would have been 2019.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, I think that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. So like this talk of the, play the kids or the youth movement or whatever, like Akil Thomas was drafted in 2018. Andre Lee was drafted in 2019. Scrolling back, Turcotte, Bjornfoot, Kaliev, Fagamo, Parikh, Spence, Nuzian, Doyle, and Lee were 2019. Akil Thomas is 2018. So he's not young. I was drawing a comparison to somebody earlier today to Nolan and King, because I think that's the obvious, comparison. But those guys, I want to say, were 22 when they got called up mid-season. So, this is not some sort of meteoric rise. He's paid his dues. He has come in and shown what he's capable of. And at the end of the camp, Fagamo, Studnicka, and Lee were the three extra forwards in camp in Quebec. Studnicka didn't get into a game. I don't think Fagamo played a game in Quebec, but I know he played earlier in the preseason. So, they definitely got their extra look at these guys. And as we said earlier, Lee is still technically on the Ontario Reign today. And I am not even going to begin to get into the LTIR right now. We'll save that for later.
Oh, yeah.
But even so, it's not going to make but a difference. So if you want, you can include Studnicka in the conversation about last cut's surprise standouts. Because frankly, Josh, I didn't expect Studnicka to be on the list that went to Quebec.
Yeah.
He didn't factor into the games, but I am still surprised that he went.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of mentioned him before too. Like he's a player that has shown that he can play at both the NHL and AHL level. I think I mentioned this the last time we talked, which was that I was glad to see that he had been signed, because my first thought was that he would be a pretty impactful player in the AHL for the Reign, but could be a plug and play guy for the Kings. God forbid somebody gets hurt. And I think that he still can be that player for the Kings going forward. So to me, it makes sense that he went. But if at the beginning of training camp, you asked me to create a roster of all the players that would go to Quebec, I'm not really sure I would have Andre Lee or Jack Studnicka on it. I think Jack Studnicka would certainly be in that conversation for me. Like I'd probably guess that he could be involved, but I wouldn't have picked Andre Lee.
Yeah.
So, and looking back, it's one of those things where, like I said a few minutes ago, you look back at what the Kings want, how the Kings want to play, how Andre Lee plays, and then look at his camp. And 72 hours ago, I wasn't thinking he'd be there, and I'm thinking, why did I think that?
I was surprised that Sammy Helenius was not on that list. And he's a little bit younger than the rest of them. He was a second-round pick in 2021, so Helenius is 21 years old. Next season, based on what I saw from Helenius in this preseason, I fully expect Helenius to be, if not on the roster, then one of those guys fighting and scrapping for a spot down the stretch in training camp. But that's for next year. Next question. This is a simple one. How many defensemen will be on the roster for game one? It's 8.
8.
I wrote that question a little bit. I was being a little bit petty when I wrote it. This was, again, before the injury to Drew Doughty. And again, we knew that there were going to be 8 defensemen on the roster before Drew Doughty got hurt. I don't want to say I'm surprised that there are 8 with Drew Doughty out of the lineup, but that's, for whatever reason or reasons, that is clearly what they want to do.
Yeah. Like we said earlier, I think for me, this seems like a safety net this early in the season. And I think that's a pretty decent mindset to have, because we've said this time and time again. Jim Hiller's talked about, like, hey, like, feel like we played pretty well in the preseason with and without the full NHL roster, which I think is an interesting thing to consider, because the preseason games where, for example, your top pairing for one game is Joel Edmondson and Brant Clark. Okay, well, like, the other team's top pairing is also a Brant Clark and a Joel Edmondson. So, like, that's one of the Kings' top 6 on defense this year. But is that the Kings' top pairing? No, obviously it's not. But you're getting this mismatch of, and this whole, like, hodgepodge of prospects and AHL contracts and some lower guys down the list in the NHL. But, like, no matter what, every preseason game that the Kings played this year, you had really encouraging signs, especially from the guys you expect to be on the NHL roster come opening night. So with that being said, I think that it still seems like a safety net for the Kings to carry the AD right now, for example, because you just don't really know how this is going to translate to actual regular season NHL games, especially when everyone kind of knows, like, for example, things have not gone particularly well in Buffalo the last couple of years. Not only do you have to start in Buffalo, but then you play 4 more road games on this opening trip and then 2 road games when you come back to the West Coast after the trip too. So you just never know what's going to happen when you open with 7 straight away from home. You never know what's going to happen once the regular season actually begins. So for me, it actually makes a lot of sense that you lose a future Hall of Famer and your team's top player to carry as many guys as you need to help fill that void, especially when you don't really know how things are going to play out. And guys like Jones and England, who are right now the 2 that aren't probably in those top 6, for me, have 2 completely different skill sets and can be utilized in different ways.
But even without the injury to Drew Doughty, with Drew Doughty in the lineup, you're looking at 8 NHL defensemen.
Yeah.
You know, England doesn't have a ton of experience, but he played all 82 games last season. And as was well documented last year, he plays a role that they value, they being the coaching staff and the front office. So whatever the fans want to think about it, the decision was made to bring in Andreas Englund for a very specific reason. Todd McClellan would always say, we knew what we were doing. Like, it wasn't a gamble from their perspective. They thought they knew what they were doing. And Burroughs would have been the odd man out had Doughty stayed healthy. And he played 70-something games for the Sharks. You know what I mean? Like, he's an NHL defenseman. Yeah. You know, they're trusting him to step into a pair with Vladislav Gavrikov. He's not a project. Whereas on the forward side, once you get out of the top 8 forwards, once you start getting into, and Alex Laferriere is playing in the top 9, but I'm considering him the 9th forward amongst the top 9. Kopitar, Kempe, Moore, Deneau, Jeannot, Fogle, Byfield, Fiala, these are proven entities.
Yeah.
Lewis is a proven entity. Turcotte, Thomas, Laferriere, not proven entities, but we know in theory what they are. And like I said, Laferriere is playing that top.
more than the other 2 after last season.
Yes, played a full season. It's just a question of whether or not he clicks with Kopitar and Kempe. And as we've said, we have proof of concept on all of them. So if you're going to carry an extra player, whether it's an 8th defenseman or a 14th forward, you just have more. You just know more what you're getting with those extra defensemen. Like I said, we have even, Jacob Muvarari, Joe Hicketts down, Riley Walsh, guy. Well, I guess Riley Walsh only played 1 NHL game. But you've got Hicketts and Muvarari in Ontario. You have 2 extra guys deep. Whereas on the forward side, you have AHL signed players like Charles Udon and Jacob Doughty, and then you've got Martin Chromiak, Samuel Fagemo, Tyler Madden, Glenn Gaudin, Jeff Malott, Jack Studnicka. I don't know what they are per se, and I don't know how they fit in really obviously. Whereas, like, as you've been saying, this entire recording, Andre Lee, how did we not do the math of like, well, this is what they want to do, and this is who's available?
Yeah.
He's the one that is the closest to looking like what they want to do. So, yeah, it makes total sense. Yep. So 8 defensemen on the opening night roster. That is what we expected. Looks like what we'll get. The next one's super easy. Will the Kings lose any players to waivers? No, they won't. Done and done. At least not in training camp. We'll see how the rest of the year goes. Number 9, I don't know how much you know about this guy. I got a little bit of pushback when I included this question in the original 10, but I was justified in my mind by the end. Will any invitees earn contracts? Nobody earned an NHL ELC, but Parker Berg earned himself an AHL contract. He was a participant in the rookie face-off and training camp, and now he finds himself a member of the Ontario Reign and potentially the Greenville Swamp Rabbits. So congrats, Parker Berg.
Yeah.
Berg.
Yeah.
All right.
You typically see, based off my experience of being with the organization now for 4 seasons, you kind of get that from the rookie tournament. Is usually there's like one guy who's like will stick around. Last year it was Ryan Francis. He was a player who had played a full pro season in the ECHL and then was an invite to rookie camp last year. Signed an AHL deal, was with the Reign, played with the Swamp Rabbits. Like you see that sometimes too. So good for Parker Berg. I don't know what opportunities he's going to get with the Reign this year. I think it is completely dependent on how he looks in Reign camp. For me, it seems like Ontario is probably pretty full at that position, but there's always going to be an opportunity because for for the listeners to this podcast, Jesse, that aren't super familiar with the AHL outside of like the top prospects, there is so much movement in personnel. And like, if you think there's a lot of movement for the Reign, if you're a Reign fan and listening, if you think there's a lot of movement for the Reign, I can't even begin to describe the movement for teams like San Jose.
Yeah.
San Jose has a completely different roster every time the Reign play them, like it seems like. And from a broadcaster's perspective, it's the most difficult thing ever to prepare for all these different people. So there's just so much movement, you just never know who's going to get an opportunity. And with the way that he played throughout rookie camp and through the rookie tournament and now throughout training camp, he's earned himself a spot. So that first step to earning an opportunity at the pro level with this organization has been checked off the list.
There was so Parker Berg's a defenseman. There was a forward and a goaltender that I also thought might wind up with contracts. As it turned out, they didn't. So I was wrong. But like you said, every year somebody makes a name, and I have an eye on that forward and that goaltender for next year. Maybe, there are players who come back to multiple camps and then earn that. All right. Now, finally, the 10th question: how will Arthur Kaliyev factor into the roster? The reality is right now he doesn't, except, of course, that he does.
Yep.
Right. The reason that the Kings...
Because of math.
Yes, exactly. Because of math. Math is the 13th forward on the team right now.
Mm-hmm.
If the speculation about Andre Lee returning before Thursday is correct, the reason why it is correct is because LTIR is an insanely complicated animal to tame. And I will attempt to do I think I said this to you or someone else the other day. I had an opportunity to talk to our cap guy. He sat down real quick and I said, "Hey man, I got a question for you." And I thought that I would preface my question with my understanding of how the whole thing works. I'd be very clever and pat myself on the back and say, "Okay, I know this is how it works." And he said, "No, that's not how it works."
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh man, it didn't even get to my question."
Tough luck.
Yeah, I was wrong. I was wrong right off the hop. But my understanding of it is the NHL season is approximately 192 days long. And when we talk about cap space, we talk about it as if, Adrian Kempe makes $5 million a year, so that's it. That's his cap hit. Well, no. His cap hit is $5 million. Every day, his cap hit is 192nd of $5 million. And every day, your total cap hit of all the salaries added up cannot exceed the end of the year. But the reality is your actual cap hit is accrued day to day. So if the Kings were to put Drew Doughty and Arthur Kaliyev on long-term injured reserve to begin the season, they would not be accruing that daily cap space that they would by keeping them on the roster. So technically, I keep wanting to call Arthur Kaliyev Andre Lee. At the moment, Arthur Kaliyev and Drew Doughty are on the Kings roster. They're on injured reserve, not long-term injured reserve, but they're on their cap hit is counting against the cap every day until that status changes.
Yeah.
The benefit of that, as I understand it, I could be wrong, is that later on down the season, when it comes time to add an additional player, whether by a trade deadline or who knows what, you want to bank all of that daily cap space. Every day that you're saving a few $1,000s here, a few $1,000s there, can wind up adding up to hundreds of thousands of dollars at the trade deadline. And you can bring in, salary retention. So if you can't afford the player you want to get, well, the first team retains 50%. The second team, if you want to bring in a third party, can retain an additional 25%. And then you have all this cap space that you've banked. Math, etc. But that's for now until he's healthy. That's how Arthur Kaliyev is impacting the season.
Yeah. So
it's not a great answer. I apologize.
He's there and he's not playing. So that's where it's at, I guess, and it impacts what else the Kings are able to do with him being under contract.
I do want to relate it directly to Andre Lee, though, because the reality is that going into training camp, I fully expected 8 defensemen and 13 forwards, which meant, in my mind, a battle between Kaliyev and Fagemo.
Okay.
And Fagemo, because of contractual status and career paths and history, Fagemo is an easier defeat for Andre Lee for a roster spot
Yeah.
for all the reasons you laid out earlier.
Yeah.
Arthur Kaliev is not so easily displaced because of his draft pedigree, because of his experience in the NHL, because of the perceived value that he has by the organization. They went out of their way to bring him back, right? There was all the talk of the clean slate, try to figure out a spot for him. They never really got a chance to figure out where he might slot into the lineup. He breaks his collarbone. He's out. Now suddenly you have this battle for the 13th forward spot, assuming they're taking 8 defensemen. And Lee versus Fagemo is a, like I said, it's just a much easier path for Lee than Lee versus Kaliev. If Kaliev returns, it does put sort of a timetable on Lee's opportunity to, now he's fighting Turcotte, Thomas, and Lewis for a spot, right? He won the first battle, which is training camp. Now he's got however long he's got to secure that spot on the NHL roster, assuming he gets called up, which he might not. I don't want to.
Yeah, and the thing is though too, we kind of mentioned this last time. Fagemo, the reason why it's probably easier for him head to head against Samuel Fagemo is because Sammy is a player who should probably play in the top 6 or the top 12,
right.
We'll say.
Yeah.
Now, Andre Lee in the AHL, at least for this season, my thought is that Andre Lee is a guy who now, after a few years and after a really strong camp with the Kings and shown what he can do, is a player that for me can probably play on any line. Last year, it was mostly 3rd and 4th line. The year before, it was the 4th line. For me, Andre Lee is a guy who could probably play anywhere in the American Hockey League, but is most suited to kind of that 3rd or 4th line role. With the Kings, he would play on the 4th line, and he would fit perfectly, right? Like, it's the perfect fit. Fagemo probably doesn't fit playing the style of play that the Kings are going to want from their 4th line this year. Now, Arthur Kaliev, to me, is probably not somebody that you would just throw down on the 4th line because they haven't done that the last few years, but is probably where he would be if he were healthy right now. And I think they would feel comfortable with that too, given his NHL experience, his pedigree, the way that they've utilized him in the past. I think all of that leans in favor of Kaliev. So for me right now, I do think that there is a window for Andre Lee to make a positive impact on the NHL roster, but I do also think that he obviously fits with what they're trying to do, so it makes a lot of sense for him to take advantage of that opportunity, and hopefully he will. I think that he will do what's asked of him. We'll see if it's enough to cement himself in that spot going forward. But again, given what we've seen from him throughout training camp in the preseason, how he's grown as a player with the Ontario Reign the last couple of years. Again, Marco Sturm speaks really highly of him too, and now Jim Hiller does as well. So clearly he has made a really good impression, and now we'll just see if he sticks and earns that role full time of what the Kings are going to have him do, assuming he gets called up before opening night.
There are a handful of players in professional hockey, and Jack Campbell was always my go-to example, where if you start talking about them, a line of people forms outside your door waiting to tell you how great they are.
Yep.
You know, if I say Jack Campbell, 8 people run over and go, you will not believe what an incredibly great guy Jack Campbell is. Oh, yeah, I know. Andre Lee may not reach that level, but I've had dozens of conversations over the last week. He is a remarkably bright light in the world of professional hockey. He says hello to everybody. He'll chat with you. He's totally down to earth. He seems like a very pleasant, likable, happy, he's a good hang.
Yeah.
It makes it really easy to root for him. So that is Andre Lee. And just one last thing about Arthur Kaliev before we move on to wrapping this up. It's silly, but as a fan, I can't help but hold on to the image of Turcotte and Kaliev at the WJC, however many years ago it was. Mm-hmm. And even though that was, 4 games, 5 games or something, it was really just like 1 game or 2 games where they really looked impressive together. Mm-hmm. In my dumb fan brain, there's still that voice going like, okay, but a line of Thomas Kaliev and Turcotte maybe rekindles some of that, magic. So anyway, those are the 10 questions, Josh. Preseason's over. You didn't go to Quebec, but you saw the other 4 games live and in person. Anything that we didn't discuss in this sort of recap of training camp that stood out to you or that you feel needs to be talked about?
I think the Kings were good at 5-on-5 throughout training camp and the preseason. I think that we've seen some really positive things from both the power play and the penalty kill. But even after the game the other night against Florida, Jim Hiller said in Quebec City, hey, like, I thought we played well at 5-on-5. Like, I felt like our team showed a lot of potential at 5-on-5, and special teams was fine, but there's still room for us to grow, especially when you have Drew Doughty not in the lineup. Like, that is obviously going to be a huge thing. I think that you're going to see his absence reflected maybe at the start of the season, maybe more in special teams, and that's just my opinion. So it'll certainly be interesting to see how the Kings fare. Like we said before, they changed up the power play in years past. The penalty kill had been changed as well. That was really good last year in the regular season and faltered in the postseason. So the other night, they gave up 2 power play goals against Florida. One of them was a really great goal by the Panthers. Another one was a bounce right off the boards that just deflected in front. Darcy Kemper committed to the shot. Nothing he could have done on the rebound. It bounced right in front and they scored. That's a really good team. They took advantage of the few opportunities they had and they beat the Kings. It's the final game of the preseason. It was a final tune-up. And now, I think based off of what we heard from Jim Hiller the other night, the Kings know those things that they want to tune up. So going into this 7-game trip, let's hope that, dudes stay healthy. They show some consistency. And at that point, I think get through these first couple of games, come back to Southern California, and then it seems like things will start to fall into place, at least in my opinion. So I'm certainly interested to see what happens. But again, I thought the team was really good in the preseason, and I was very impressed with what I saw. And I'm not trying to go too far ahead here, but I really am optimistic going into opening night. And again, the newcomers, the way they played at 5-on-5, everything has given me, I think, something to look forward to this season. And there are definitely some storylines going into opening night that I'm very interested to see how they play out.
I'm right there with you, and I don't want to be. And it's not just because I'm, am a psychotic fan who doesn't enjoy being disappointed, and setting high expectations can only lead to disappointment. I just all summer long was looking at this roster and going, well, I don't know if this works. I don't know if that works. I don't know if this combination is a good idea. And then we're watching the preseason, and Quentin Byfield looks terrific as a center.
Yeah.
He and Kevin Fiala look like they do have chemistry. Warren Fogle is playing the role that he was brought in to play. Tanner Jeannot is going into the corner and creating turnovers. Akil Thomas is bearing the, you know what I mean? Like, everything looks like it was supposed to. And that makes me deeply uncomfortable, because last season, I don't know that everything looked the way it was supposed to, and yet they still managed this incredible road record. And I think it was to you that I said the real shame about last year is that I am now, I'm a shelter pet now. I'm a rescue animal who comes from an abusive home. Like, because last season went so poorly, I'm not going to get excited about a strong start to the season, even if it looks like it did in preseason, which was pretty hard to criticize, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they were out shooting their opponents. The goaltenders had great games. The young guys had great games. The vets had great games. Like, yeah, they lost to Florida. So what? They're the defending champ. It happens, right? You outshoot your opponent 2-1 and you lose anyway. Happens a couple of times a year. They lost in overtime to Utah on that Carter George, Brant Clark play. Okay, whatever. He's an 18-year-old kid getting, jumpy with a pass and, whatever. Other than that,
look pretty good.
Yeah, what went wrong other than that? Like, nothing. They dummied Anaheim at home and at home. Mm-hmm. They beat Vegas. They beat Boston. They went to Quebec, right, which is not an NHL building. It's capable of being an NHL building, but it's not an NHL building. So I guess I'm just nervous, because I agree with everything you said. They looked really good.
I was talking to a friend of mine who covers the Washington Capitals. This was 2 days ago on the phone. and he's been working in the preseason. I've been working with the Kings in the preseason, and we've just been talking about the two teams candidly. And it's like, is Ovechkin going to get to the goal record? Are the forwards going to look good for the Caps? So the Caps have a really good decor. They got Matt Roy. And then he asked me about the Kings, and I was like, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I am really, really happy what was seen by us in the preseason, what we saw. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Kings are or aren't going to win the Stanley Cup. The Kings could go on a 10-game win streak this year. They could go on a 10-game losing streak. It's going to be a long season. It's tough to predict, right? But I think if you just really look at what the Kings wanted to do in the offseason, what they wanted to get from this team, and what it seems like they hope to be going forward, we saw that from the 6 games in the preseason. Whether it was an NHL lineup that they were throwing out or playing against or not, what the Kings have basically made it seem like they want their identity to be going forward. We saw that, and the results followed. It was 6 games. It was in the preseason. Half the time it was against AHL guys. But even these last 2 games against Boston and Florida, 2 teams that at least I expect to be 2 of the best teams in the league, the Kings looked good.
And they held them to less than 20 shots.
And they held them to less than 20 shots. Yeah. They probably could have beaten Florida. I thought they were terrific against Boston. I thought they controlled the game against Boston.
Yeah.
But now you go into opening night and you have to play 7 games on the road, 5 of which are all on a 17-day road trip. We could be having a different conversation in 10 days, Jesse. But the fact of the matter is that if you want something to be hopeful for, if you want something to be optimistic about heading into Thursday's game in Buffalo, it's that the way the Kings have said they want to play, they played through 6 preseason games and the results followed. And now we get to see what happens in an 82-game regular season.
If you pumped me full of truth serum the day before preseason started and asked me what their record would be after that first 7-game road trip, and you asked me would I be surprised if they came home 0-7, I would not have been surprised. I wouldn't have expected it, but I just wouldn't have been surprised. Question marks, new goaltender, new systems, new forward lines, new D pairs, like who knows? Yeah. Then you lose Arthur Kaliyev, then you lose Drew Doughty. But now, if you ask me would I be surprised if they came home less than 3-3-1, yeah, I'll be surprised if they come back off that 7-game road trip under 500.
And I think it's a good thing that you're getting some of these teams so early in the season. I mean,
yeah.
You look at what this schedule is through these first handful of games for the Kings, and to me, like, there's a lot of teams on this schedule that are supposed to be pretty good. Boston's going to be good. Toronto's going to be good. You come home and you play Vegas. And again, it's 7 straight road games, but it's a 5-game road trip. Like, you got Boston in the preseason game and you controlled the game. I think it's going to be different in a couple of days.
To be clear, no Swayman in that game.
No Swayman in that game.
Yeah.
It's going to probably be Jeremy Swayman on Saturday in Boston.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit different. But the fact that you're getting teams like Boston and Toronto early, maybe before they even get going, is a really good thing. So see what you get. You're going to play in some tough games. You're going to play in some tough buildings against some really good teams. Let's see what happens. 7 games on the road to open the year. Anything could happen. And who knows? I didn't expect the Kings to win 11 straight road games last year.
No.
So
I don't think anybody
if the
did.
Kings start the season 7-0-0, I think I'd be surprised. But I guess at this point, you never know.
Yeah. Well, listen, that's why they play the games. It's the old cliche. Josh, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon. Kings fans, thanks for listening.